Welcome to episode 140 of the Daniel Yours podcast with today's guest, Julia Shelley. Let's go. Welcome back to the podcast, everybody. Joined here today by Julia Shelley. Julia, thank you for bearing with me on the awkwardness of the staring at each other in silence after we were just having a full conversation, just for the technical aspects of the podcast. But thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.
Julia, I was trying to think of a way to introduce you. And I know that we just talked about how I don't really introduce guests but like you've done so many different things. And I don't know that there's like one way to define you. Like, is there something that when someone asks you, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
What do I do? Let's see. Well, it's changed. I've had many different roles, as we all do over the years, especially career roles as well. So currently what I do is I am a fitness coach, an online fitness coach. I've done personal training and everything in person. However, I traveled the world for the past 21 years. And so I really loved creating an online community because I'm so used to being on the go. And so I like to be able to train people remotely as well. So I actually have a team of women called Army of Angels that I coach. And I started that business a year and a half ago. And my ladies are also all over the world. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, but we are in 6 different countries, is where my clients currently are. The majority in North America. However, just because of my life of traveling the world for the past 21 years, the type of clients I seem to attract tend to come from some of the experience I've had while living in Africa and everything. So that's what I'm currently doing, is an online coach for a team of women. We go through, fitness, nutrition, mindset. We meet for weekly group calls on talking about many different topics. And then usually twice a year, we have a retreat as well. So far the retreats have only been in Canada. Next year, we will be branching out and going international with these retreats. So that is what I'm currently up to.
Amazing. Yeah, bringing that online experience into real life, which is how you and I met at the Evolve Strength Conference in Edmonton. Yeah. It's like we all, talk online and we spend time online and we work online and we do stuff online, but like we're also real people and like real people like to be with people, and especially people, trainers in fitness. Almost all of us have like a background of training in person. And so we're like around people. We like to be around people. We like to talk to people, like to, just be with other humans. And so bringing that together with clients is amazing. A challenge for sure. I'm sure on the business end, which we don't really need to discuss, but also just an amazing way to just bring people together and let people know that like, there's other people like you. People have your struggles too, and you're all going to get through it, and we're all going to be okay together here.
Yeah, absolutely. I find it really helps clients when they get to know each other as well. When they know that they're part of a team and that they aren't alone in whatever their struggles are, and that we can, go through that together, but also celebrate each other's wins together as well. So having that online is powerful, but making sure that we meet regularly to foster those relationships is also really, really powerful. And then when we can meet together, it's in person, it's so incredibly special. So right. I love that. Yeah.
Right. And bringing that team aspect to something that is very much an individual effort. Like you work out by yourself, you eat by yourself, like you do all the things by yourself. I'll speak for all coaches. Like if I could work out and eat for my clients, I would easily do that because one, it would just make my job so easy. Everyone would have like the best result. I could just do everything for them. But like, obviously, that's not the way it is. So, but bringing that team aspect to something that's very much an individual pursuit is super, super interesting. Now, one thing you referenced there, and I want to start to give people some context to this conversation, is that you lived in Africa and you've lived and done some things that, you've lived more of life and seen more things than most people will ever see, myself especially included, and most other people. But can you give us a brief overview of why you're living in Africa, what you were doing while traveling the world for the last 21 years, and then we'll sort of, break that down.
Sure. Yeah. So I'll take it back to how it actually started. So I grew up, you're in Ontario as well, right?
Yeah, just outside Toronto.
Okay, right. I grew up in Guelph. So I
close.
was, smaller smaller city back then as well. It's definitely grown, but smaller city back then. And I grew up in kind of certainly don't want to act hard done by any means, because of my experiences traveling the world. I have, seen much worse. But we didn't have a lot of money. We'll just say that. So we didn't have a lot of money. And so my family had never traveled. We hadn't left Ontario. We hadn't gone anywhere. Wow. And so I always had this excitement and zest for life. And I really was curious as a young kid, and I really wanted to see, what was out there. And I actually remember that there was this restaurant in our local mall, which was across the street from where we lived, and it was called Timbuktu. It was kind of like Rainforest Cafe. Okay. I know they have that in Toronto. So it was kind of like that. It was called Timbuktu, and it was all decorated, an Africa theme. And I loved it. And this was my favorite restaurant. So every birthday as a kid, I always wanted to go there. And I just became fascinated with it. So my mom even decorated my room as kind of a jungle, like Africa theme. So even as a young child, I was fascinated with Africa. And then, so as I grew up, it's interesting how it went there, because I had no motivation from, or was not led in that way from anyone in my family. Nobody in my family had served. Nobody's been in the military. Not many people had really traveled. Many of them haven't even left Ontario. And so I remember even getting on the floor. There's a couple members of in my family that won't even get on the 401. Like that scares them. So I thought,
getting on the 401 is a horrible thought. To anyone who doesn't know, the 401 is like the worst highway of all time. But
it is pretty scary, I will admit. Probably going to Africa might be easier, but I don't necessarily know where that came from. All I know is I loved this restaurant, Timbuktu, when I was a kid. And my grandparents had National Geographic. They had a subscription, and I loved it. So we didn't have it, but every time we went to their house, I was fascinated with the photography in National Geographic. And so I was just very curious as a young kid, and decided that I needed to see the world. But yet again, we didn't come from much. We couldn't really afford that. And so we had never traveled. So I thought, how am I going to do this? And how am I going to see the world when I can't afford a plane ticket? So I applied to be a flight attendant. Thought, I'll get paid. I'll get paid to see the world. And so I got the job when I was 19, which was shocking because I only had deli girl on the resume. Worked at Zayre's in the deli, and that was it. So I had some friends that were with this airline, and kind of helped coach me for the interview. And I got the job, and that was my first airline. They've gone under. That was a long time ago. But I went from them to when they went bankrupt to another, was with them for another, 8 years. And then eventually I started traveling more and more, saw North America, saw Europe, and eventually was just curious, like what else is out there. So after the first, I'd say 8 or 9 years as a flight attendant, going to more of the Caribbean and European destinations, I wanted more. So I applied to an airline in the Middle East called Etihad, and I moved to Abu Dhabi, spent a year there, traveling more of Asia and Australia a little bit. And then after that, again, it just kept piquing my curiosity. I thought, okay, what else is there? And so I came home after that. I actually went back to school for policing and was interested in going to Africa because I had been, but not much of it. But I wanted to go over with the UN, and I did not know how to get involved with the UN. All I knew is that I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to go overseas and be able to help women, like victims of human trafficking. There was lots of different motivators that I had from my experience living in the Middle East and everything. So I came home, went to school for policing, had zero desire to actually do many of the jobs that are required to be a police. Like I never wanted to hand out a parking ticket. I did not want to go through what I had to go through to get to the departments I wanted to go to Africa. But I knew that was part of it. So I started going down that avenue. And while I was doing it, a pilot that I knew reached out to me and said, like, what are you doing? And I said, this is my end goal. And he's like, well, I know how to get you to Africa now. You can come over to work for the UN now with the current experience you have as a flight attendant. And this will give you the experience to see what it's like before you jump through hoops and maybe work for the RCMP and go up north and hand out parking tickets and break up bar fights and then eventually 10 years later get to Africa.
Right.
So he saved me about a decade of working my way up and said, we'll bring you here now. And so I went over with my experience as a flight attendant. They also thankfully liked the security experience that I learned in school as well. Since the UN, my airline ended up deploying us to the UN missions. And so all of our missions were all over the Middle East and Africa. So of course, the combination of being a flight attendant and then having a security kind of background really spoke to them. So yeah, so that's, so 2012, I ended up on my first deployment in Afghanistan. I did 2 years there. And then when they pulled out of that war at the end of 2013, then I was sent straight to Timbuktu. Go figure.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The actual Timbuktu?
It actually came full circle. I remember when I got the call leaving Afghanistan, they're like, because normally after a tour, you come home, you rest a little bit. And because the base was closing, I stayed in Afghanistan to close down the base. And as we were leaving, I remember it was, December 27th, 2013. And my boss called and said, I know you're supposed to go home, but how do you feel about going to Timbuktu? And I was like, you're joking? And he's like, no, it's a real place. It's in Mali. Do you want to go? And I was like, absolutely. It's like, you can't take your time off. You have to go right away. Like, you're needed right now. And he's like, sign me up. Let's go. So I went straight from, Afghanistan. I think I flew through Turkey, Casablanca, and ended up in Timbuktu.
Wow. What a way to make that story come full circle, actually ending up in the real Timbuktu.
The real place, yeah.
I remember, I don't know if you watched Bugs Bunny as a kid, but like they would always say he should have taken the left turn at Albuquerque. And for the longest time, I didn't think that Albuquerque was like a real place until I started watching the UFC, and there's like a whole bunch of fighters and like a big fight team that trains and lives in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And I was like, is this real? And I looked it up. I was like, sure enough, Albuquerque is a real place. And sure enough, Timbuktu is also a real place in the world. Yeah.
You know what I learned while I was in Timbuktu? Well, I wasn't living in Timbuktu. I was living in Bamako, Mali. And then we would fly into Timbuktu. And so when we would like go out and socialize and meet other expats and everything in Bamako, I was out one night and I met an American guy from Kalamazoo. And he was like, yeah, like that's where I grew up. I'm from Kalamazoo. I'm like, that's a real place? Like, yeah. I'm like, so you pretty much are here because you just had to complete the circle. Like you had to go from Kalamazoo to Timbuktu. And you're purely doing this for the name, aren't you? It's just like, well, partly. It's like, okay.
That's so interesting. I wonder if he really even put that together until you said it to him. Because to him, it's just normal. Like he's actually from Kalamazoo. It's like a real place to him, obviously. But like to the rest of us, it's like, that's not a real, that's like a thing that people, it's like a saying, not a real actual place, right?
Yeah. The funny thing with Timbuktu as well is it's French. So Mali is French speaking. So people say Timbuktu, but the airport sign and locals say it's Timbuktu, the way it's spelt. So it's actually Timbuktu on the airport sign. So yeah, I remember when I got there, I was like, hey, wait, is this the right place? Like,
there you go. There's some
French
trivia knowledge for everyone.
Yeah.
So how does fitness fit into all this? Of course, you had some like experiences, and like, we spoke in person about this. Like some wild experiences, which we may or may not get into. But where does fitness fit into all this? I got to imagine that you didn't just start working out like a couple of years ago. And so like, even before the police force, like wasn't your first time ever working out. You were probably active as a kid, but where did the competition and that stuff squeeze into all this?
Well, I was active as a kid, but not really on as many sports teams as people would expect. Because when you become competitive in sports later on, or fitness competitors or even trainers, a lot of us come from loving sports and playing and multiple different sports growing up. So a lot of people find that really strange and different about me that I didn't. I did gymnastics as a kid. So that was my first kind of introduction to fitness, was through gymnastics. And then I would do all the sports, in gym class in school, but by no means did I excel in any of them. And it's funny because I was always better in any kind of sport like gymnastics, where it's like just you beating your personal best. I was never great I love working with a team. Obviously, I coach a team now. But I was never great at being competitive with people. I've always been competitive with myself.
Interesting.
So that's I always had to beat my best self, whether it was in like a skill or a strength goal or whatever it was. So I don't know why that just didn't happen for me with team sports. So I stuck with gymnastics for a long time. And then I guess getting into my early 20s, I rollerbladed a lot. Honestly, I don't think I went to a gym yet, because I was still in a phase where, early 20s, I just wanted to be pretty and cute and attractive. And I didn't want to gain too much muscle. And so I was afraid of protein, and I didn't want to lift heavy weights or anything like that. So I remember those feelings now. So I always have to remind myself of that for clients when they're starting there, right? So I remember feeling that way, and it wasn't until I went to school for policing that I decided, oh yeah, now I do want to be strong. I need to be strong, first of all, to pass the fitness exam, the test, and what do I need to get there? So I knew I needed to start running, which I remember I think my first run in college was around 3K in the winter time, and I got a cramp and went home sulking. I was not athletic. I didn't look like I was in bad shape, but I was, I guess, skinny fat. I was not athletic.
Right. Which is an important distinction, right? Like people can be thin and not strong or even healthy for that matter, right? It's not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I remember it started with running and then just, being told you got to breathe through it, run through the cramps, you're going to surpass this. And so I remember going from, I think it was in February, 3K, getting a cramp, going home and wimping out, to I think that August I did my first half marathon, and then a few months later did a 30K in Hamilton, around the Bay. So it just by keeping at it and staying consistent in the training, you do get yourself there. Because I remember that 3K seemed like the biggest hurdle to surpass, and not even a year later it was 30K. So that was really the first time I realized how much I did enjoy that challenge. And so then it turned into not just running. Okay, well, what else do I need to do? So in policing, it was in our fitness test, there was a lot of strength as well. So there was a lot of of chin-ups and push-ups, and then our actual obstacle course that we had to do to apply, right? So I started really working on that. I also went back to school as an adult student because I was a flight attendant for so long, and I was living in the Middle East before that. So when I was in college, I was actually 27. And so I was 10 years older, about 9 or 10 years older than most of the kids I went to school with. And being that I was in school for policing, there was predominantly men, right? There's definitely a few women, but way more men. And just because they were so much younger than us, and they're just I guess the whole boys being boys thing, just kind of heckling us and bugging us about our fitness standards. And so we were judged differently. Yeah. So there were 4 judging cards. There was men, I think it was under 18 or over 18. Could have been 18 or 19. And then there was women under, let's say 18 or 19 and over. And so I was on the easiest card, being female and an adult student, 27. They were a little bit more lenient with me compared to a younger male, right? So I remember the guys in the class, not necessarily making fun of me directly, but just making fun of the girls as a whole. There was a couple guys that just really, I don't know, were just kind of bullies. And so they were poking fun at how easy it was. And if all they had to do was what we had to do, like they'd, have 100%, whatever, it'd be so simple. And that got to me. And also because I was so much older than all the other women in the class, I had never looked at myself as a leader, but at that moment I took that initiative to be a leader because I thought, oh, I better stand up for these women. So I took that role, and I asked the teacher that day, I was like, okay, fine. I want the 17-year-old boys card. And she's like, your final mark, you're marked on this, right? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. I'm going to show that kid. So give me the 17-year-old boys card because that's what he was marked on. So I challenged the bully in the class.
Nice.
It's to be marked on the same card. And I got 100%.
Amazing. I will say that. In my university, one of my professors was responsible for a lot of the fitness testing for firefighters in Southern Ontario, and so similar. I don't know, and there was security guard or not security prison guards and a couple of other these type of jobs, not police officers, but similar style of thing. And I remember for what it's worth for the boys that fitness standards for the men was not all that hard.
No.
As if you were a decently in shape 18, 19, 20-year-old male, you should be able to pass that. You didn't have to be some super monster to pass it. So for them to be belittling you or the women in general and acting like they're so tough because they can pass their own tests, they're not that, it's relax a little bit. It's not that crazy, right?
Oh, they were 17-year-old boys. I just at that stage, I don't know what I was expecting, but I just thought, okay, well, I knew it was bugging some of the younger girls in the class. So I was like, well, I need to rally up for the girls and get us together and push them. So I went for it. I went for 2 different awards because then I got into running, of course, because of training for the 30K. So, there was a most mileage award, and then there was a female and male athletes of the year. So yeah, I went hard after both of them. And it's funny because I wasn't that girl in high school. I wasn't on many teams or anything like that. But the second I got there and had that kind of, I felt like I was in a role where I could stand up and make a difference and lead these women. And I don't know where that came from. Because again, I wasn't like that in high school. I just felt that it was my responsibility. So I did. And I think that was the first time that I was ever in a kind of a coaching position where I was a leader. I don't think I ever saw myself as a leader before then. And that really shifted my perspective and also helped my own confidence. So once I put myself into those situations and then worked on my health and fitness throughout the year to make that outcome happen, I saw the difference that it could make, not just in fitness, and getting in shape, but just my confidence soared. My grades were doing better. I was nailing every other part of my life, and I was just so much more motivated. So I realized the impact that fitness could have, and it just really took off. And so from there, it also gave me the courage, because I was able to do that. Then when I finished school and ended up falling kind of backwards into this position overseas to work with the UN, I don't know that I would have had the courage or had the guts to go to Afghanistan right away, but I think all of that led to it. My confidence just soared in that time, and I thought, yeah, I can do this. Just like that boy challenging me in college, now the new challenge is Afghanistan. So let's go.
Right. I was just gonna say, I would have a hunch that part of this is the graded exposure to more and more difficult tasks, where your first run was a 3-kilometer run and it crushed you, but you did it. It crushed you, but you did it. And then after that, it's okay, well, that was hard, but I got through that. Okay, what's the next thing? Can we do 4 kilometers, 5 kilometers, whatever it is? Can we do it faster? Can we do it better? And slowly. And this is how everyone's fitness journey goes, right? They see someone like, you or me or other fitness people doing, lifting however much weight they're lifting. Like, oh, I could never do that. It's like, well, there was a day where we also couldn't do that either, right? Where we had to learn how to, do a bodyweight squat and do a dumbbell row with 10 pounds and like do all the things. And slowly but surely it gets stronger. And this is where like, I really think that fitness crosses over into real life, just as you alluded to, where it's like this increasing exposure to difficult challenges in fitness translated to like, okay, if I had to go live in like a war-torn country tomorrow, me personally, I'd be like, absolutely not, because I've never been in anything like that. Would be such a huge jump in difficulty of life situation for me that I would have no way of like comprehending that, right? But having traveled a little bit more, having maybe some more experience, having maybe friends in the region, or having something like that, makes it a little bit more palatable to be able to do that thing, right? And then I would also imagine just your personality, like you said, trying to beat yourself constantly, like in self-pursuit. It's like, okay, I did that. Can I do a little bit more? Can I do a little bit more? Can I do a little bit more? And then we're talking also about a long period of time, right? You didn't say that this happened in 3 weeks. All of a sudden you were just like top of the class, beating all the boys, like doing the thing. It's like, no, you put in the work and it happened over some months and you got what you needed to get done, right?
Yes, exactly.
And then so then you go to Afghanistan and you haven't competed in fitness competitions yet. Is that correct?
No, I did right before I left.
Okay.
So it started right before I left. Yeah.
Okay. So you competed there, and then, and what category, forgive me, I'm not super familiar with like all the bodybuilding categories, but what did you compete in?
So I started in, I was preparing for fitness, as in kind of like how you see in IFBB with the fitness routine, but not in the CPA, which leads there. So I started, my very first show was much smaller. It was a small regional show called the UFE, and it was just more of like a fun, it was called Halloween Mayhem, and it was just more of a, I don't know, I thought it was a fun kind of dress up for Halloween sort of thing. So I dressed up as Tomb Raider because I always loved Angelina. So that was my first show. And I was training for the fitness routine round because of the gymnastics background. So I loved that part. And then it had a modeling aspect to it as well. So fitness model, which was kind of an in-between bikini and figure. Right. And 2 weeks before the competition, I was practicing my routine and the splits, and I pulled like my hamstring really badly, and it was bruised. It was bad. So I wasn't sure that I wasn't able to practice for a while, at least over a week at least. And then we're coming into peak week. So I remember peak week going, oh my gosh, what do I do? Like if I can't pull this off, or if I do, I can't really practice until I perform on stage. And so at the last minute, I decided to switch, and I didn't want to give up all the hard work I put in. So I switched to figure and fitness model. So there were 2 other categories that you could go into in that organization. And so I didn't know where I would land, because I had been preparing for the fitness routine. So it was just a gamble. So I entered both, and I ended up winning figure. And then I got second in fitness. So I did well in both of them, but figure seemed to be, I was a bit more muscular. So that was the one for me. So I stuck with that. And then the following weekend, I stuck with that. I went to a CPA show, which was OPA back then actually. And I competed in only figure, and that one really, I won that one as well. So from there I was like, okay, this was supposed to be a one and done Halloween kind of show, but I'm doing all right, and I seem to like it. So I might as well keep going. So I planned on continuing, and then I got the job offer with the airline, that would deploy me to the UN, and I didn't think it'd be possible. So I thought, okay, well, this is a grown up job. This is more important than training for these shows, and I've got to do it. So I accepted the position, and when they first told me Afghanistan, I was like, okay, I think my fitness endeavors are on hold for right now, thinking that we wouldn't be able to do that over there. And a few months later, I got there, and it was the most motivational place to train because there's really nothing else to do. So we were on a military base, and it's, mostly just guys working out. Like when they're not, out patrolling or whatever inside the base, you're either eating or you're working out. There's nothing else to do. So it's like,
I guess that makes sense.
Why would I not train for this? So I thought, okay, well, I might as well keep going. So I continued to prep for another show, and while I was based in Kandahar, and then I just made sure I flew home just before. So I got home 2 weeks before the show just to finish the last final bit. The gym was pretty great in Kandahar on the base. The only real challenge was the food. And then the environmental stressors that naturally come with living there. So there were definitely problems, challenges, rocket attacks and such where, I can't really go, I really don't have time for this, Taliban. Like, I got to get to the gym. Like, this is not cool. Like, could you fire at us later? So, things like that happen, but made it work. And I ended up loving the challenge more. It meant more to me because it was harder. And then, so I don't know, I had more of a desire to do it. But when we left Afghanistan the following year, going to Africa was another story. It was a greater challenge than I ever imagined. So I thought, oh, okay, I can compete over here and like nothing can stop me. But, getting to Africa where many of the places you just don't have a gym, you cement at the most, like homemade cement weights was the best we could come up with. We'd use aircraft brakes, that kind of stuff. So we would create or make what we could out of things, but there was no guarantees. So I did put it on hold when I first went to Africa, put it on hold for about 5 years, and then I was hungry again. So I was like, I'll figure out how to do something with this cement. So we did it again.
So we'll talk about the training second, and I think we'll zone in on the Africa portion for that. But I want to go back to your time in Afghanistan and talk about your nutrition there. So the gym setup was pretty good. Your training was like pretty set. Aside from avoiding intermittent rocket attacks, you had the stuff that you needed to train properly. Yeah. Now your food, I assume that it wasn't like, you weren't going out grocery shopping. You didn't have like a full kitchen. There were like food was available, and this is what's for dinner. If you don't like it, too bad. And is that more or less correct?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right. So
you can't control it.
Right. So given that, and we talk about not having the perfect macros, and I don't have this ingredient, I don't have that. Like, how did you actually navigate your food? What was your strategy for eating according to your goals, given like having basically no choice?
So it got really boring because there were some choices, but in order to stick to my goals or stick to my plan at the time, it was before I really even understood macros back then, to be honest. So I was more on a meal plan, when I first started, and that meal plan hit those macros. So that was the idea, but it was actually the only thing that like I couldn't have tried. There was no point in trying to fit things into macros because over there was no variety. So It's like, well, I might as well stick to a meal plan because really all there is some boiled eggs. I can take the yolks out, and what else was there? There was chicken, but a lot of it's breaded and sauces, or it's not all chicken breast. So I would do the best that I could, and I would try my best to get to know people and, let them know what I was doing or what I was aiming for. And eventually people were like excited by that. And they would rally around me and go, okay, well, I'll like steal you a few more eggs from the DFAC. It was called a DFAC. It's like the mess hall. We call it a DFAC dining facility. And so I had my pilots, stuffing boiled eggs in their pockets, some of my military friends, and we just kind of rallied together, and it was super boring. I ate a ton of boiled eggs, a ton of tuna packets from the, PX stores. They would sell those, so I could buy tuna packets, and chicken that I would it was almost always breaded or in sauces. So I would take as much as I could in to-go containers, and then come home and actually take the bread off and wipe it down. And so that was the best that I could do. And it was just those things on repeat. That was it. It was just chicken, boiled eggs, and tuna for the entire prep. Really boring. at least for my protein. And then a lot of salads. Again, when it came to the carbs, I had to stick with rice most of the time. But again, I couldn't cook it myself. So I couldn't control how much fat was in it, like what kind of oils they're using. So I would try my best to prepare things that I could. I actually brought a grill, and I had it we lived in sea containers. So I had a sea container and I had a grill in my sea container. So eventually I did kind of like backdoor, buy boxes of chicken from the chefs of the DFACs. So once I had gotten to know people a little bit more, I was like, listen, this is what I'm doing. Can you sell me a box of chicken? I don't want the bread on it. This will be easier. So eventually I was buying it like from the chefs and cooking it in my sea container.
Amazing. Yeah. I mean, it sounds extremely difficult and also extremely boring, but like you made it work because that was your goals. And I think that that's like understanding that for people listening is like, people get stuck on this, like, oh, eating healthy is boring, or like it's hard, it's whatever. And it's like, there's levels to these things of difficulty, and everything's relative. Like I get that most people are not living in that situation, me included. Like I don't know what that's actually like. I can imagine it, but I don't know what that's actually like. And so I'm sure I'd struggle at first to like figure it out, and then eventually you know, like you said, you get to know people, you get to figure out the ins and outs, and you make it work. But understanding that, like, hey, you can do this. Like you live in North America for the most part. People who are listening, you have grocery stores, like you have all the options available to you, and sometimes that is the problem, is having too many options. But maybe reducing some of those options and just really thinking about, like, what do I need to do to get to my goals, and then do that, rather than thinking always about, like, what is the thing that I want to enjoy the most at every moment of every moment that I eat, right? The food should be enjoyed, and I'm all for that, but also it can't be the crux of what is like holding you back from getting what you want. And you have to put the work in, is I think what I'm getting at here. And you are obviously able to do that despite way less than stellar conditions. And I think another thing to highlight there is, like, and this is again just biology, but like if you were a 247-pound man, like probably that breaded chicken and all the sauces would probably be fine, because you need that many more calories and that much more food, right? And I would assume that some of the stuff that they're doing is to beef up the calories without having like more expensive food on like a military base. But you obviously have to eat according to you and what you needed, not just what was there and what someone else, maybe there was another guy on the base who was a bodybuilder and he was 250 pounds. Like you can't be doing the same things because you're not the same people, right?
No. Yeah, exactly. And you reminded me of a good point as well. It's that successful people, they just make their environment easier. So we don't have like, I'm not going to have so many tempting snacks in my home, because then I don't have to worry about that, right? So if I don't have those things in my cupboards, then it makes it a lot, it's not bad food. It's not things there's nothing that's off limits, but it's not going to distract me from my goals. And because it's not off limits, I can go out and enjoy it in a much better way. So when I do have a dessert or a burger or something like that, it's not something I'm having at home. I'm making it special. I'm actually going out and having it and enjoying it even more, because it's not something I make for myself all the time, where I don't care if my chicken is incredible. I think I'm pretty good at cooking it by now. I've done more than enough food preps, but I'm not as picky about that. So when I eat out at restaurants, it's going to be the things that are special.
Yeah, every meal doesn't need to be like a Michelin star meal. Like
no.
get good enough at cooking or prepping or whatever, and then just deal with that. And then, like you said, treat your desserts like actual treats. Like you get so excited about that burger, you get so excited about the donut or the whatever ice cream, whatever your thing is, because then you'll just enjoy it so much more than like if it's something that you always have every day of the week, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So you were able to nail down the nutrition, and that was difficult, but you did it. Now the training in Africa, there was a little bit of a hiatus and more difficulties. And one thing that I kind of want to zero in here is, like, you didn't, like, the brakes from the airplane and stuff that you use, these cinder blocks and whatever you had, you didn't really know what the weight of those things were. So how did you structure your weight? Because we're so used to like, do 3 sets of 10, at 50 pounds and 3 sets of 12 at, 55 pounds, whatever it is. But, when you don't know the weight or the shape or like the balance of an object, like how did you actually do your training? Did you just lift it until you got tired and then that was it? Or was there more to it, or how did you structure it?
A lot of the time it was. So it wasn't that I could really progressive overload or go up in weight because there wasn't that much variety. A lot of when I did get back into prepping for shows, I was mostly living in Uganda, and Uganda had a lot more available. There was a gym. We couldn't get to it all the time, and it didn't have that much equipment, so I couldn't rely on it. So what I did is I ruined my suitcases, and I brought over, I remember in one suitcase I brought over a 25-pound kettlebell. Another suitcase had 2 10-pound, I said kettlebell, 25-pound kettlebell, 2 10-pound, like a pair of dumbbells, and a skipping rope, a mat, and a 12-pound weighted vest that I wore. Wow. I would wear it on the plane all the way to Africa. Don't wear vests on a plane, and people don't like that. So
I get weird looks in my neighborhood wearing weighted vests, so I can imagine on a plane how that looks.
Yeah, on a plane it doesn't go so well. It really doesn't go so well. So if you're going to buy a weighted vest to wear on a plane, make sure it's colorful. Make sure it sticks. Don't make sure you do not want it to be black.
Oh,
okay. So mine was blue. That I think that helped a little bit. But also it was something that it was only 12 pounds. So I could actually take it off, put it in my backpack. Right. And so I would be able to bring it without wearing it. But then if I needed to, if it was winter, I had a jacket on, then I could wear it. And then I'd be able to bring more in my carry-on, because that was the idea. I was going for minimum 2 months every time I went on deployment. So I didn't want to really use up. I wanted to wear it if I could, so that I could still use my carry-on bag. So it was very tricky. In the winter, I could get away with wearing it. So I would get excited for travel in the winter.
That's so funny.
But then when I got to Africa, of course, it's not winter. So, leaving Canada, you're like, oh my gosh, like this is so heavy. I've got my big winter coat on, my 12-pound weighted vest. Yeah. Like, you get to the airport security, they're like, what is with this girl? But then when you get to Africa, you're just like, now you've got all this stuff and you're
take all the
just sweating buckets. You're like, now what do I do? Yeah. So it was difficult. It was definitely difficult to travel that way. But I made it work. And then once I got the kettlebell to Africa and the dumbbells, I left them there. So I didn't go back and forth with things. So I had a basic amount of equipment. Now, the only other thing is I had zero control over my schedule or what countries I'd be in. So my boss would say, hey, sometimes they'd give you 24 hours notice and say, hey, what are you doing? Can you go to Congo tomorrow? And you're like, okay. And then you're there, and next thing you know, you get sent to Sweden. Not that that's a normal place that we would work, but we did have a contract there, and that did happen. So I went from, Congo to Sweden to Uganda, and you're just going back and forth, and you do not have the proper clothes for everywhere that you go. And you don't have equipment for everywhere. And I'm not going to bring my kettlebell everywhere with me. So I'd have to play the odds. I'd be like, okay, the chances are I'll be in Uganda for this amount of time. I'll leave a kettlebell there. If I end up in Congo, I will get somebody else, a pilot, to bring in a kettlebell from Canada. I found ways. I got really, really strategic about how I got equipment and weights to Africa. But it happened, and it worked. And eventually I had, a 30-pound in Congo and a 25-pound in Uganda. And then, so a little bit of variety. Gym. Yeah, that was it. I pretty much relied on that though. So when I did that first prep back to stage, that was all I actually relied on. So I thankfully, as I said, I was in figure before. So I was naturally a bit more muscular. And I just took it as, okay, well, this isn't going to be perfect. I'm already fairly muscular. So I'm just going to be working on a lot more of conditioning and fat loss, and just kind of shedding, the normal extra weight that we would have on, and getting ready for stage that way. So there was no progressive overload because I couldn't control that.
Right.
So yeah, it was just more of a fat loss and conditioning kind of workouts, a lot of HIIT to get to stage. And so that's how I really first got back into it, not expecting anything, amazing to happen out of that. But it actually worked out well, and I did win my pro status from that.
There you go. There you go.
Prep. Yeah. So
I think some of the takeaway from this is adapting your expectations to the reality of your situation. Like, I'll have people who approach me and, you know, they'll want to get like, you know, build all this muscle or do all this, like, you have this, like these big fitness goals. And like, okay, I've got, you know, they're at home, not in like a, you know, a country that's far away, and they're at home and they're like, oh, I've got like a, you know, a red band, a 12-pound kettlebell and like a yoga mat. I'm like, okay. Nice, but like you're not going to gain you're not going to gain an appreciable amount of muscle. This is just the reality of the situation. But it doesn't mean that you can't become fit or improve your fitness or improve your health or whatever. Like, there's still plenty of things you can do. We just have to set the expectations accordingly. Like you said, if you wanted to transition to go into the bodybuilding category, probably wouldn't have ended up very well because you wouldn't have been able to put on muscle necessary to compete in that category. However, you had the necessary equipment to maintain the muscle that you did have and lean out to compete in the category that you did win in. So it's a really just about, like, again, matching your expectations to the reality of your situation, which I think is where a lot of people get stuck. They have big goals, and maybe it's not their fault, but they have big goals, and it's like, okay, but are you actually willing and able to do the things that it takes to get that thing?
Right.
If not, then, you know, maybe we've got to adjust that, and that's okay. That's okay to change your goals as long as you're getting healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say a lot of people, like some of my clients, when they go on vacations, and I always adjust, you know, and we pivot and I adjust workouts around a vacation or an injury or whatever is happening in their life. There's going to be many times where we do need to adjust for our clients. And that's not a problem. It's just that it is important to have that talk with them ahead of time and say, okay, well, in this time, we're probably not going to progress to this particular goal that you're going after. But if we can maintain, then that's amazing. If you can go and, you know, bucket list Europe right now and not go off the rails and, you know, still get your steps in, you know, a decent amount of cardio and train, you know, wherever you go, then that's great. The food might not be perfect. Traveling is tough when it comes to a meal plan or macros or whatever your approach is. That is extra hard, especially on airplanes as well. Just even the travel to get there, it's hard to get enough water. We're so dehydrated. There's not much movement. So one thing, you know, I always tell people after being a flight attendant for so long, get up and walk around. Book an aisle seat so that you can do that, especially on a long flight. Like, book an aisle seat so that you can get up, walk around, buy water after security, buy as much water as you possibly can, because the crew is only going to have so much. And then when they come around, they're going to give it to you in this glass this small. Yeah. And especially if you're somebody who is really focused on your health and fitness, you are having much more than that. I mean, I have 2 bottles beside me right now. Like, I can't help it. Right. So keep those things in mind. And it is absolutely worth it to pay airport prices for bottled water after security. It is absolutely worth it. Just like any investment in our health is, because the times that you don't, and then you're completely dehydrated and you get overseas, most of the time I'd end up getting, you know, a cough or a cold would start or something like that, just from not taking care of myself for those 24 hours. Yeah. You know, and so it's not worth it.
You would know better than me, but at most, if not all airports that I've been to in North America and in Europe, like, there's at least like a water fountain or a water fill-up station where if you bring an empty water bottle, you're allowed to bring that through security, and then you can fill that water bottle up, and it can be huge. It doesn't matter how big it is, as long as you can fit it in your bag. But that's my strategy for water, because same thing is, like, I can never get enough water. It's just like these little tiny cups. It's like, okay, well, that was lasting me 5 seconds. Like, now what?
Yeah. We call them the little shot glasses. You get a little shot of water, and that's all you're going to get on the flight. And so because of that, and because they just realistically, if everybody wanted, you know, 1.5 liter bottles, they can't do that. So take that ownership. You know, it's just like for our health and fitness, for anything, just take that ownership. When I travel, I pay the price for a guest pass at gyms, and it's absolutely worth it. You know, and if I want to save some money and get some activity outside, then I'll do that if I can. But if I can't, then I'm going to go to a gym. It's absolutely worth it. And I actually just kind of flip my, the way I look at it. I think about, oh, this is part of the experience. Like, this is part of travel. So now I get to try a new gym and see what it's like, and what are gyms in Sweden like, and, you know, how awesome is that going to be, and what equipment do they have, or how do they train? I take it as part of the tour.
Yeah.
So
That's a good way to think of it. I think that I would, you know, agree with you on that one as a fitness enthusiast, we'll say, but like other people might be like, oh, what a drag, and you know, that's fine. But again, it just comes to like set your expectations accordingly, and like you said, maintenance can be progress. I think people get caught up in this always chasing some goal, always chasing fat loss, muscle gain, strength gain, you know, whatever it is. But like at some point, you're gonna like not want that anymore. You're just going to want to be like, I'm good. I'm as lean as I want to be. I'm as strong as I'm willing to get. I'm have as much muscle as like I'm willing to put on. And like, then what? You don't just continue to chase it for forever. Like, you just want to maintain that. And that's where you want to kind of live for the most of your life. And so I always think about it as like, travel is kind of practice for that. It's like, okay, we've been in this fat loss phase for 2-3 months, you know, whatever it is. And now you've got to go on some work trip for a week or a vacation. It's like, okay, well, let's practice that. Because after this, like, you're going to want to stay there. So let's practice that maintenance despite imperfect conditions. And if we land, you know, close to where we want to, then that's a check mark. We're good. And we just get back at it once we're back in our normal environment. But, you know, like you said, you got to mold your environment to be as advantageous to you as possible. And for most people, again, they're not going into environments that are as limited as to the environments that you've lived through.
Yeah, but it's a great challenge. I love that because I've been in those environments. Then it makes going, you know, on a vacation to, you know, Dominican or Mexico so much easier. And it's like, oh, okay, I got this. So and that's not just for me. That's for anybody. So that's anyone, you know. Take your past, take a situation that you've been in that has really challenged you, and use that as fuel for your next challenge, for whatever the next scenario is. And if it happens to be something like this, where it's, you know, staying on track with your fitness, well, is there a time from your past that you can draw from where you were successful in that? And if you weren't, because you're really new and you're a beginner to fitness, then what else in your life have you been successful at in your career or in education or with your family? What else can you look at where you're really proud of, you know, what you've achieved there and what you've created? And how can you turn that into your fitness goal and taking care of your health? Because you take care of your health and your fitness, you're going to be around longer for those people, for, you know, to be able to do the work that you're passionate about, to be able to care for your loved ones. So yeah, how can you focus forward? I
100% agree with that. And this is where there's so much crossover between like just fitness and life. And there's so many lessons that we learn like both ways. And I think that in the gym is kind of a microcosm of the things that are happening in an individual's life, not in the grand scheme of the world. There's a lot of geopolitical things that are happening that have nothing to do with the gym at all, but but you know, the things of your life and just improving and controlling your situation and setting goals and being organized and time management and all of these things that can kind of be learned in and through the gym, and then take them, you know, back and forth through all of that. But I think that in a way, some people might think like, well, it's easy for Julia because she's lived through all this stuff. It's, you know, difficulty is relative, right? You know, the hardest thing, you know, a 10 out of 10 hard day is a 10 out of 10 hard day no matter where you are in the world, even if someone else's is worse for you. So to that thought, like, how do you kind of handle that? If that's anything you experience. If it's not, then it's cool. But do you get that pushback ever? Like, well, it's easy for you to say you've done this before.
I do, but then it's usually to do with fitness. So somebody just sees the end result. They just see what you've achieved and they don't actually know the story to get there.
Right.
So a lot of that comes from, and unfortunately, when you've competed for so long and you've done a lot of fitness modeling, because they go hand in hand, and people only see that. So they don't see the journey to get there. And we all have a journey. And so what I would tell people is that, you know, you might think that I can achieve these things and that I'm capable of it because you see the end result, or because my challenge in your eyes seems harder than yours. But that's relative. That's completely relative. You know, when I was in South Sudan, Sudan, actually, during the Sudan uprising, I remember doing a prep for a show there and people thinking, I have no idea how you're doing this. And I would try to explain to them, I'm like, you don't understand. There's pros and cons to all of our situations. So yeah, it's tough. We're in, a scary environment. However, I'm over here as a single woman with my work environment. I don't have 4 kids that I'm making different meals for. I don't have the temptations of the grocery stores that you have. Right. We have very limited supplies. So I actually, for me, being able to control, especially when you work in war zones and you can't control so many things around you, the few things that we can control is what I held on to, and I held on to really tightly. So if I could control my health and fitness and my daily activity, that helped my mindset. And if my mindset was strong, that also impacts the people around me. And if I'm impacting the people around me in a positive way and raising morale on base, then that is helping all of us get through a scary war, right? So we do what we can to impact positively the people around us. And so that was what my main concern was. And that's really what kept me going and competing for so long. Go figure, I leave that lifestyle and I'm actually not competing anymore because it's not the same draw. It's not just all about the physique or about the body. I liked what else it brought into my life and how it helped the people around me. Because I always found others would rally and others would want to train with me. And I knew that it was helping my coworkers. So it meant more to me because of that, and which turned into, creating my business and impacting in that way. But I didn't have the challenges that others had. I had zero desire to have some of the local treats because, there was lots of good local Syrian desserts or that sort of thing. And it's not like I wouldn't try it. I would, but it's not comfort food that I grew up on. Right. So the comfort sweets that I grew up on weren't challenging to me because they weren't around me. Where somebody at home, if they're training in Canada or the US, and they've got all the variety of restaurants, plus they've got all of their social crowd. They've got their friends and their family and their kids and so many other things that could tempt them or derail them in that way. Not that these people mean to do that to them, but it just happens. And so we just had a different situation. And so my situation wasn't actually harder. It wasn't harder at all. In many ways, it was easier. So.
That is a super interesting way to think about it. And I think that I'm going to listen to that little spiel a couple times. Everyone hit the rewind button and re-listen to that and let that sink in and think about how it applies to your own life. And, I think a nice way to sum that up is control what you can control and then just let everything else, fall as it may. And then that plus leading from the front to help other people. One thing we didn't get to talk about, I know we're running a little short on time now, is just the mental health benefits of exercise and the community support of all that. But I think it leads perfectly into what you're doing with your group coaching, your Army of Angels now, is you're leading from the front and all these people are feeding off of everything that you're doing to improve their lives, both physically and, psychologically and all of the things. And we just need, I think a lot more of this leading from the front is really the way, because anyone who's ever tried to help someone in their family get healthy, it's you can tell people all day that they shouldn't be doing unhealthy behaviors, but it's not really an effective way. It's you have to lead them by doing the thing, and then they will follow. Mm-hmm. And you do an excellent job of that. So I applaud you for that. But that mindset shift of thinking about what are the actual pros of my situation, despite on the surface it might look like a negative situation, is something that myself and probably many, many others should really take a look at in our own lives.
Yeah. It's a lot better for our own mindset on the daily as well, to concentrate on what you can control and all the positives around you in any kind of scenario, because we've all been through rough times. And I know, we don't have a lot of time to touch on it, but if we chat again or anything about, we could get into the mental health side. Mm-hmm. The mental health side of it, we all went through hard times equally across the world, during the pandemic. So in that time, I don't think it wasn't trauma Olympics. We were not comparing who's got it worse. We all had a horrible time. So if we really wanted to get through that, and we did, then we had to concentrate as often as we could on the positives, and then be that leader for people around us, because there might be a day where I'm feeling positive, but my partner or my family members or somebody is not. And so by me being that leader, that is going to impact them. And that's the same thing with our health and fitness as well. So if you are leading by example, you have no idea who you are impacting. Because we are always impacting people around us. It is not just some fitness influencer or some celebrity, fitness model, anything like that. Absolutely everybody is impacting their direct circle. So it's important to understand the power that you have.
100% agreed. And maybe we'll set up a part 2 and get into kind of the other half of this. But Julia, just to wrap up, thank you so much for being here today and sharing about your story and sharing with us. Before we sign off, what is your contact info? Where can people get to know more about you? I'll throw it in the show notes, but if you want to just rattle it off here so people can tap
sure.
in.
Yeah, thanks. It's Julia Shelley on Instagram, but it's Shelley. Everyone does just the LY. So it's EY. And then that's my main page. And then my business group is Army of Angels.
Amazing. And when is the next retreat planned for, tentatively?
It should be, I believe it's going to be either March or April next year. And then another one in November. So I think for March or April, it's back and forth right now. We're deciding between Thailand or Bali. Awesome. And then in November, it will most likely be Costa Rica.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So people still have time to join if they're hearing this now in October, November-ish of 2023.
Absolutely.
Yes. Amazing. Well, check that out, everybody. Julia Shelley and Army of Angels. I'll throw the links in the show notes. Julia, is there any last message that you want to leave the people with here in closing?
Oh, I don't know. We touched on so much, I feel like. So yeah, I think the number one thing near the end, it was that just to control your environment. So as much as you can control your mindset and your environment. So that's not just the environment around you, but inside your head, how you're speaking to yourself on the daily, right? Because a lot of that is we can limit ourselves with our own self-talk, and we can, shoot ourselves in the foot by just how we set up the environment around us. So make it easier for yourself to get to the gym, make it easier for you to stick to your nutritious plan by setting up your environment around you and knowing that if you do that, you're impacting others to do the same. So be a leader.
Well said, Julia. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. Make sure you're following Julia. Make sure you're following myself as well on Instagram and all the places. Like, share, subscribe to the podcast. All that good stuff helps get this message out to more and more people. And that's that. Go outside. Be a good person. We'll see you next time.